Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees. Here's tonight's top story. The Prime Minister is accused of betraying the North and Midlands as the government sets out its scaled-back plans for rail investment in the region. Also tonight, the Prime Minister faces calls from his own MPs to urgently rebuild public trust after admitting his own mistakes in handling the Owen Paterson case.
I think the committee will agree that I've accepted that it was a mistake and that it was my mistake.
And Stormont ministers vote in favour of mandatory COVID passports. People in Northern Ireland will need to show their vaccination status to enter nightclubs, restaurants and cinemas. The Transport Secretary today announced plans to scrap the Leeds leg of the HS2 high-speed rail line and curtail the Northern Powerhouse Rail. MPs from both sides of the House accused the government of breaking manifesto promises and betraying the North. There was also criticism that much of the £96 billion pledged today has already been announced. NTD's Malcolm Hudson has more on this.
The Prime Minister has been accused of betraying the North and Midlands as the government set out scaled-back plans for rail investments.
There was anger in the Commons on Thursday as Transport Secretary Grant Shapps confirmed that the eastern leg of the HS2 rail was being scrapped and the planned Northern Powerhouse Rail was being curtailed. The HS2 project has been touted a key way to link the south-east with cities in the Midlands and North. But despite the PM committing last year to complete the railway, the Transport Secretary announced a new plan to cut one arm of the line short and instead upgrade parts of the existing network. He said the new configuration would be delivered sooner and cut journey times elsewhere.
£96 billion of expenditure, the single biggest ever investment. And we haven't made any secret of the fact that some of that money is already the Birmingham to Crewe line, the Crewe to Manchester line. Last time I checked, that benefits the Midlands and North, doesn't it?
Voices from both sides of the House accuse the Tories of betraying poorer parts of the country and breaking manifesto pledges. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the Prime Minister has let down everybody in the North with this revised plan. The opposition says the Tories are reneging on a promise to level up regional disparities.
The Prime Minister repeatedly promised that HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail would be built in full. Today that promise has been broken and Leeds and the North have been betrayed.
Promises to build HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail were a cornerstone of Boris Johnson's 2019 election campaign, winning him many traditionally Labour voting areas of northern England. The PM has described accusations that the government has broken promises as total rubbish, but it remains to be seen whether the voting public agree. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Wednesday the way he handled the findings of a report into a Conservative lawmaker's paid second jobs was a mistake. Johnson was questioned by senior lawmakers of a Liaison Committee. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab said the government is getting on with fixing the problem amid anger among Tory MPs. This report is from NTD's Joy Felix.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing warnings from his own MPs that he urgently needs to rebuild public trust for the row over standards at Westminster. On Wednesday night, the Commons backed the government proposal to ban MPs from taking paid political consultancies.
The ayes to the right, 297. The noes to the left, 0.
However, fewer than half of the MPs voted for the motion, with the opposition parties abstaining. 4 Tory MPs even voted for the rival Labour motion, which would have imposed a clear parliamentary timetable for implementing reform. On Wednesday afternoon, the Prime Minister was grilled by members of a Liaison Committee.
Do you think that Owen Paterson was guilty or not?
I think it was a very sad case, but I think there's no question that he had fallen foul of the rules on on paid advocacy as far as I could see from the report. I think
The Prime Minister said some people seem to think Patterson didn't have a fair right to appeal.
I think the committee will agree that I've accepted that it was a mistake and that it was my mistake. All we wanted to do was to see whether, in view of the particular and frankly tragic circumstances of the case, there was any scope for cross-party agreement on an appeals process. That was all we were trying to do.
Parliamentary Standards Watchdog has determined Patterson committed an egregious case of paid advocacy by using his position to promote two firms that paid him. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab told Sky News ministers are committed to fixing the problem, amid continuing frustration and anger among Tory MPs over the row. Joy Felix, NTD News.
Northern Ireland has become the third nation in the UK to launch COVID passports after ministers voted in favour of the plan. That means people will need to prove they're fully vaccinated, have recovered from COVID-19 in the last 6 months, or show a negative test result to enter nightclubs, restaurants and cinemas. Venues could be fined if they refuse to comply with the rule. NTD's El Rhodes has the story.
Mandatory vaccine passports are to be introduced in Northern Ireland after Stormont ministers backed the move despite DUP opposition. That means COVID certification will be used to gain entry into nightclubs, bars, restaurants, cinemas, theatres and other hospitality and entertainment venues. For many large indoor and outdoor events, certification will also be required. Sinn Féin, SDLP, Alliance and UUP ministers all backed the plan. First Minister Paul Givan of the DUP said his party chose to vote against the plan but not to veto it. He criticised the policy as divisive and said it would likely have a marginal impact on reducing transmission rates. The plan was proposed by Health Minister Robin Swan, a UUP member. Under Swan's plan, people wishing to gain entry to designated venues will need to demonstrate evidence of COVID-19 vaccination, a recent negative lateral flow test result, or proof of a positive PCR test taken within the previous 6 months. Swan wants the regulations to come into effect on November the 29th, followed by a 14-day grace period, and then become enforceable on December the 13th. Non-compliant venues could be hit with a £1,000 fine. Wales and Scotland also have their own COVID passport systems. In Wales, people need to show an NHS COVID pass to gain entry to nightclubs, cinemas, theatres and large indoor or outdoor events. People can also use a negative rapid test result taken in the previous 48 hours. In Scotland, people need to show proof that they have been fully vaccinated to enter nightclubs, adult entertainment venues and many large events. The scheme may be extended to theatres, cinemas and other hospitality venues in December. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
As vaccine passes are introduced in more countries, the former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics tells NTD there's little evidence they're effective in limiting the spread of COVID-19. The scheme hasn't been introduced in England, although it's part of the government's Plan B restrictions, which would also include mask mandates in some settings and advice to work from home. Here's NTD's Jane Well with more.
COVID passes are being rolled out in more countries and regions. The former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics tells us that such passes appear to be having little effect on case numbers. He's based in Wales, where COVID passes were recently extended to cinemas, theatres and concert halls.
We have seen cases fall in Wales over recent weeks, but they've also fallen in England, where they don't have a similar policy there. And they're starting to tick up cases now in the last couple of days, COVID cases, but that's probably just going to be mirroring what's going on across Europe, where we're seeing big rises in cases in Republic of Ireland and Western Europe as well. So I just think that the difficulty for me is that all these Western European countries seem to have these vaccine passports. Cases are still going through the roof. There's very little evidence really that they're having any effect at all.
England hasn't confirmed whether it will introduce a COVID pass scheme, but the government said it will be part of its contingency plan, its so-called Plan B restrictions.
We are seeing actually in England a number of employers and venues asking for them anyway. So they're kind of creeping in via stealth without the government pushing these kind of policies forward. I think ultimately, evidence-based, there's very little evidence that they are having the desired effect if the effect is to control the spread of the virus. I think inevitably they probably will come in England over the next month or so.
While over 100 studies provide support for natural immunity under the government's Plan B measures, COVID passes in England would only include vaccination status. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
The chief executive of the National Grid has said they see a sufficient capacity of both gas and electricity for the winter. His comments come as the National Grid reported its half-yearly financial results. Britain's energy prices have reached record highs recently, causing nearly 24 energy suppliers to collapse and some industrial firms to reduce output. Wholesale gas and power prices have risen sharply due to lower than usual gas stocks this summer, a reduced supply from Russia, and the onset of colder temperatures. Despite that, the National Grid is benefiting from an early commissioning of the North Sea Link, which connects electricity between Britain and Norway. The North Sea Link power cable began commercial operations early last month and is expected to improve the UK's energy security. At the Royal Botanic Gardens in London, over 1 million twinkling lights illuminate a festive winter trail. Now in its 9th year, the trail features a host of seasonal favourites, alongside pioneering new light installations. NTD's Neil Wadre went to enjoy this celebration of nature by night.
Here at the Royal Botanic Gardens, the magical 1.5-mile winter trail is open. Among the 14 glistening installations and the 3 light shows, let's see what visitors will be dazzled by. It's Christmas at Kew Gardens and there's a welcome for all. Adam Thau, Director of Commercial Activities, runs through what's in store for visitors.
So we're now in our 9th year, and in addition to our long-term favourites like the amazing show that happens behind us with projections onto water and enhancing the Palm House, we also have great shows at the Temperate House, soundtrack to music, really lively. And in addition to that, this year we've got 3 new installations. Spheric is an amazing globe which spans the bridge over the lake.
2,000 LEDs reflecting in the water create the illusion of walking through a globe.
We have projection trees, so these are laser-sharp projectors which are projecting a history of Christmases at Kew directly onto trees. Really wonderful storytelling right in the middle of the gardens.
One new installation is called Aurora, based on the natural phenomena Aurora Borealis, also known as the Northern Lights. There's plenty to see. Singing trees. A fire garden. A piece called On the Wings of Freedom, inspired by butterflies. And lots more. Adam told us a little more about the creative process behind the ideas.
So we approach it differently every year. I mean, our starting point is always the gardens themselves and the infrastructure that we have. It's really a celebration of nature.
Walking the trail, you are immersed in the landscape. And there are plenty of stop-off points for refreshment. There's a mini fairground too. Adam says the winter trail is one the entire family can do, from toddlers to grandmothers, and lots of people leave really inspired.
You're almost taken on a journey through the gardens. In addition to the physical walk, emotionally there's kind of very lively, engaging scenes, and then there's really quiet moments of reflection where the trees are the focus, it's calm, and then you turn a corner and bang, there's a light show and music again. So people leave really inspired. And
the finale at the Palm House gives you a grand farewell. a winter's trail with lights to delight for one and all. It's open from 4 till 10 p.m. daily until January 9th. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Kew Gardens.
Still to come, the wife of the Chinese former Interpol president is now a political refugee in France. She and her children are under round-the-clock police protection after a suspected kidnap attempt by Chinese agents. That and more after the break. Hundreds of Iraqi migrants who have been camping in freezing forests on Belarus's border with Europe started flying back to Iraq today. The Iraqi government has arranged for people who failed to cross into Poland, Lithuania or Latvia to head home. This comes as European sanctions stop airlines flying into Belarus from the Middle Eastern countries from which most migrants arrived. NTD's Al Rhodes brings us this report.
Hundreds of migrants who have camped for weeks at Belarus's border with the EU checked in for a flight back to Iraq on Thursday. The Iraqi government said it's arranging flights for those who want to go home. Over 400 migrants were to board a flight in Minsk bound for Erbil and then on to Baghdad. Iraqis make up a significant number of the 4,000 migrants waiting in Belarusian forests to try to cross into Lithuania, Latvia and Poland. They face harsh, cold conditions, often with young children, and even beatings by border guards. Some migrants at the Belarus-Poland border were still living in hope Wednesday night that Poland would allow them entry.
We are waiting. We are waiting for Europe to decide.
Several airlines have already agreed to halt flights into Minsk from countries such as Iraq and Syria. Brussels hopes that pressure on airlines coupled with migrants giving up and going home will finally see the crisis ease. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
The Estonian government summoned over 1,600 reserve soldiers on Wednesday for an unannounced exercise that will include strengthening the border with Russia. Its police and border guards say the exercise was in response to the migration crisis at the Belarus border. The EU neighbours of Belarus, a close Russian ally, have warned that the crisis could lead to a military clash. They have declared states of emergency and deployed military forces near their borders. While Estonia doesn't share a border with Belarus, it has a similar geopolitical history to Lithuania and Latvia. Estonia's Minister of Defence said last week the potential for escalation is extremely high. The reserve soldiers are also helping to install 25 miles of razor wire in places along the Russian border where risks of illegal crossings are highest. The exercise is scheduled to last until the 25th of November. The Russian Defense Ministry said today a Russian frigate has successfully test-fired a hypersonic cruise missile against a target located in the White Sea waters northeast of Estonia. The test comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin said unscheduled NATO drills in the Black Sea are a serious challenge for Moscow. The wife of the imprisoned Chinese former Interpol president talks openly for the first time. Grace Meng said the Chinese authorities are the monster. Meng is now a political refugee living in France. She and her children are under round-the-clock police protection following what she suspects was an attempt by Chinese agents to kidnap her and her children. NTD's Eddie Aiken has the story.
Grace Meng is the wife of Hongwei Meng, the former Interpol president from China. This is the first time Meng agreed to be filmed and photographed since her husband vanished 3 years ago.
I have the responsibility to show my face, to tell the world what happened.
Meng used to enjoy the privileges that flowed from being married to a senior member of the governing elite in communist China. Now she's a political refugee and living with her twin boys in France. She said the Chinese authorities are the monster.
For today's China, in my eyes, I think they are the monster now. because they eat their children.
In her exclusive interview with the Associated Press, Meng revealed that she and her children are now under round-the-clock police protection following what she suspects was an attempt by Chinese agents to kidnap them.
I think they would be all crazy and angry for my action. But you know, I'm the mother. Mother normally very brave to protect their children. There is a nature of the human. So I don't scare anything.
Her husband was also a Vice Minister of the Public Security in China, part of the apparatus that keeps the Communist Party in power. Since their last message in September 2018, Meng has had no contact with her husband. Multiple letters sent by her lawyers to Chinese authorities have gone unanswered. She's not even sure if he is alive.
我当然不知道。
This has already saddened me beyond the point where I can be saddened further. Of course, it is equally cruel to my children.
Chinese authorities said Meng's husband abused his power to satisfy his family's extravagant lifestyle and allowed his wife to use his authority for personal benefit. He was sentenced to 13 years and 6 months in prison on charges of accepting more than £1.5 million in bribes. But Meng said that her husband was purged because he'd been using his high-profile position to push for change. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Ireland's reimposed COVID-19 restrictions take effect today. Bars, nightclubs and restaurants must close by midnight. Proof of vaccination is now also required for cinemas and theatres. And people are advised to work from home where possible. Health officials warn that hospitals will face increased pressure in the coming weeks. 3 months ago, the government announced plans to drop almost all restrictions, but infection numbers have since increased again to levels close to last January's all-time peak. The Irish Prime Minister said he isn't ruling out imposing more restrictions if the spread of the virus doesn't slow down. Ireland is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world at about 93% of the adult population. Critics of mandates have often pointed to countries with high vaccination rates experiencing surges in COVID-19 despite more requirements being imposed. Novak Djokovic, the world #1 tennis player, has reiterated his stand about freedom of choice over taking the COVID-19 vaccine. Suspense is growing over his participation in January's Australia Open.
The freedom of choice is essential for everyone, not just whether it's me or somebody else. It doesn't really matter whether it's vaccination or anything else in life. You should have the freedom to choose.
The Serbian has repeatedly declined to disclose his vaccination status. He said last month that he was unsure if he would defend his title at Melbourne Park. Government officials of the state of Victoria have banned unvaccinated players from the tournament. Melbourne has had the most cumulated days locked down of any Australian city since the coronavirus pandemic began. Victoria's Premier Daniel Andrews said he would not apply for permits to allow unvaccinated athletes to enter the country. Now stepping back in time, through your smartphone, Greece's Ministry of Culture and Sport, in partnership with Microsoft, is launching a new immersive tour at one of the world's major archaeological sites. Using augmented reality technology, visitors will have the opportunity to walk around the ancient site of Olympia at the time the original Olympic Games were held. The story comes from NTD's Eddie Aitken.
For nearly 1,000 years, Olympia was host to the Games in ancient Greece. It served as the inspiration for the modern Olympics. Now, Greece's Ministry of Culture and Sport has worked with Microsoft to map and build virtual representations of the site as it once was.
The ability to actually virtually recreate 27 ancient monuments, to hear the story of what they're all about, I think is opening up a completely new way of experiencing our cultural heritage.
users can tour the site remotely or in person with an online presentation and an augmented reality mobile app.
We took the input from the archaeologists and together with our technology, we utilized and we synthesized to make the best approximate in how things looked more than 2,000 years ago.
Microsoft started the project 18 months ago, scouring Olympia with drones and sensors. Last year, the company also reached an agreement with the Greek government to build 3 data centers in Greater Athens, in an investment to reach up to £750 million. Tech companies are racing to deliver mixed reality platforms and gear, which blends the internet with everyday experience. It's part of what's being called the metaverse, a futuristic online world aimed at merging real and virtual life. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
And finally, a Russian stargazer has built his own observatory on the top of his house, complete with a terrace and a telescope. He made the whole thing from scratch, including the telescope itself. NTD's Lily Joel brings us this report.
This house has a feature rarely seen on property listings, an observatory. The owner, an engineer and stargazer, built it himself. And he also made the telescope inside.
When there are interesting objects, people come to have a look. Now is a good time to see Jupiter, the Moon, Saturn. Everything can be seen from here and is quite interesting. When people take a first look, they admire Saturn and Jupiter. The Moon in particular impresses them with its craters. It looks great.
The 12-foot wide dome is made from waterproof plywood, used as formwork for the concrete, sheathed with galvanized iron and glued with aluminium tape. It rotates using rollers from an old pair of roller skates. The plastic body of the telescope is a recycled sewer pipe. The owner says it all costs less than £250.
Everything is self-made here. It's possible, of course, to buy all these things, but first it is expensive, and second it brings you double the pleasure when you do it yourself. Not just the fact that you have made it yourself, but also that it is no worse than factory-made stuff.
A specially designed mount allows the telescope to move to precise points in the sky. The device is connected to a computer that can remotely control the observatory and take pictures of the stars. Lily Joe, NTD News.
That's the news for today. Have a good evening.